Hi, welcome to 3AI EVOKE Roundtable Series Session 2. Today's topic is really interesting in terms of the content, in terms of the quality, in terms of the speaker it carries. We will be talking about AI for startups, the new template for hypergrowth and customer experience. And in this roundtable session, we have leaders comprising AI analytic leaders comprising of companies like Uber, Swiggy, Gojek, Lenskart. We have Ishu Jain, who is the director of analytics for Swiggy. We have Javed Abdulla, who is the data science leader at Uber. Uh, we have Saurabh Agrawal, who is the head of analytics at Lenskart. Mathangi she is the head of data for Gojek, and Himanshu Mittal, who is the director of analytics for MetLife. The roundtable session will be moderated by no other than Manas Agrawal, who is the CEO of Affine Analytics. We are really looking forward for an interesting set of perspectives coming up from the great leaders we have in this panel. So Manas, over to you for, I'll hand over the mic to you for an interesting discussion, and we are really looking forward to that.
Absolutely, Kapil. And we could not have had a better lineup of panelists. And a few minutes back, when we were at the backstage, I was just telling them I have the easiest of the job today, and the best of the job because I would be listening to people who are leaders in their own right, stalwarts of analytics industry, people who have taken their organizations from beginning on analytics to being true leaders in analytics, have handled multiple large programs there, and their perspective, I believe, would be very rich to anyone listening in, anyone trying to understand how the topic is relevant to them across multiple dimensions. So a quick introduction beyond what just Kapil mentioned. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders at Affine. My own experience around 20 years, and I must say that the field of analytics has never been as exciting, as transient as it is today. And hence, when we see more than 30 unicorns in India, even before the year has gotten over, we see a plethora of companies either completely based on AI or at least leveraging AI at the core of their business. I think this is one of the most relevant topics that I've been I have come across. So very glad to be here on this roundtable. And my request to each of the panelists to go ahead and introduce themselves, also open their comment with some thoughts on, in their perspective, in their vision, which are some of the areas they see as the hottest areas of application of AI, data analytics. What are some of the key themes that they see coming up where people should focus? So may I request all the panelists to please, by turn, speak about themselves a little and about this particular opening question. So maybe Himanshu, you can get started, please.
Yeah, thanks Manas for the wonderful introduction, and thanks everyone for joining this session and listening us today. My name is Himanshu Mittal. I am in my current role. I am a director analytics in MetLife. I have around 14 years of experience totally into data science and consulting. I spent around 7 years in Cognizant Business Consulting. After that, I have joined Boston Consulting Group. They have their advanced analytics group called Gamma. I was one of the initial member there, and now it's a worldwide more than 500 people team. I've spent around 6 years in BCG working on different domains. And now currently in my current role, I have been tasked to actually set up this analytics team for MetLife. So I call it as a startup in a big company. So we are kind of setting up this startup in Hyderabad, which is actually tagged to a bigger organization, which is Fortune 50 company MetLife. But we are building this team from scratch. So in my current role, I have this responsibility to actually set up the team and also deliver improved digital maturity within a traditional organization like MetLife. And the today's topic is like very interesting, and I'm also looking forward to hear some of the meaningful insights from my fellow panelists. But if you ask me, Manas, I think analytics can support through the entire value chain of in the startup, whether it is logistics, operation, marketing and sales and service. But the two areas which I believe are most important right now, if you ask me, first would be the cyber security. I think analytics is something that can actually help in dealing with the cyber security. We all know that cyber securities are going up because we are using so much of personal data to make personalized offerings which also have the cyber threat. So I think artificial intelligence can actually help to analyze the previous attack, it can also help us to identify certain patterns and can predict potential threat. So I think cybersecurity is something that startups and other organizations should definitely be one focus area in terms of AI. And the second most important area in my mind is marketing and sales. And it has been seen that sometimes for startups and otherwise also, your marketing and sales is the most complex things, because you can build certain things, but to sell them is the most important task. And sometimes half of your labor cost is actually belong to marketing and sales. And right now, with the help of analytics and algorithm, there are techniques which can actually analyze videos, written content, social media posts, and they can actually provide insights to a startup to stay competitive. They can also try to forecast that how much business or everything they are going to get in future. So I think these are the two area: marketing and sales and cybersecurity are the top from my perspective. Having said that, there are other very innovation which is happening in the area of HR. I was actually talking to somebody like yesterday, and what these guys are doing, they have actually created an algorithm which actually listen to the video of a candidate and try to predict if the candidate is bluffing or not, and then based on that it reject or select. And those guys are actually combining that in artificial intelligence along with the personal decision making to arrive at a conclusion. So I think there are many topics, but these are some of the important topics. Over to you. Maybe Saurabh, you can go next.
Yep. Thanks, Himanshu. I love the example where you talked about using video analytics for knowing the candidates are bluffing or not. But to me, today, the biggest challenge is to get people to switch on the video. Uh, that's where the problem starts with. But hi, everyone. Glad to be part of this panel. I'm right now working at Lenskart, heading the analytics and a bit of marketing function also. And I've spent quite a bit of time working across the data engineering, which was called data management erstwhile, then into campaigns, working at American Express, Tata Group, and Motherson. So worked in all spectrum of analytics. And definitely today, I think so. We are at an epitome where it's just starting, and every company, every department needs analytics to be like a core skill. Like earlier, we used to have knowing MS Office or Word and Excel as a core skill. Being educated on analytics and using is becoming a very core skill. Uh, in my role and at startups, what I feel is there are two, three key areas where analytics or AI will be a differentiator for them to disrupt the market. The first is in customer experience. How do we provide a great customer experience for the customer? In our place, the in companies like us, are the challenges. People go offline and they buy specs and they go online. So in things like books, it's easier to do because the product is undifferentiated. So we have been working on heavily towards using facial recognition and using virtual AR and try on, and that has become a core proposition for us, and it has made the buying experience easy online. So embedding AI into the core of the product is a key thing for startups to get a competitive edge. And the second key area is into marketing and growth. And this is something which I would say from my personal experience. When I joined Lenskart back in December, there were two, three key areas which was given to me. The first one was marketing, and to kind of help company grow from 2x, 3x, and due to some org changes and all, the marketing head position was empty for some time, and a lot of money is spent into digital marketing. And I volunteered for that role, and I was given, say, rather than working from outside, why don't you take the business ownership and drive it? And I would say it's a very complex thing, but it has a lot of number science. Erstwhile marketing used to be doing more of ATL, so doing TV ads and newspaper ads, and then waiting for the output to come in. But the revenue impact was never coming in so easily. But with all the Google ads, Facebook ads, even TV with Hotstar and all the people watching matches and serials, it's become hyper personalized. So use of AI for growth is a big area, and it's also become my bread and butter now. With that, maybe I'll request Mathangi to go next.
Thanks, Saurabh. Hi, all. I'm Mathangi. I have 17 years experience in data science analytics. Have few patent grants to my name. Recently, also published a book on natural language processing beginning of this year. Glad to meet you in this forum and share some of my learnings in this space, as well as get to know from my peers in this industry. Um, I think I can see two emerging things that is coming. A lot of times, AI in the last at least 3 4 years have meant vision and voice. But there is also a switch towards a more traditional area which has been overlooked, which is on the personalization bit, right? How do we personalize user experience? Saurabh did mention some part of it, but more on how do you use the data that we know about the user to provide a delightful experience, but also a profitable experience for the organization. How do you balance the trade-off of personalization with profitability? Is emerging and is going to emerge as one of the big areas. So, which is why we will see more things like personalized prices, personalized delivery time, or things like that, where a lot of these have been more driven either by deterministic formulae or through human intuition, could be taken over by machines in a predictable fashion. Another area that I think a little bit long term will emerge is that from we have been doing a lot of recommendations, picking up from choices, understanding human language, etc. From there, we will see a shift towards generation, right? So when I mean generation, I mean generating all sorts of things, be it generating image, voice, be it generating text and generating your summaries, or generating videos, for instance. And generation and personalization, the first trend that I said, will also go hand in hand, right? We have been restricted in terms of choice picking, so to say, from available choices. From that space, we could move into a choice generation area where, and hence it becomes even more personalized, right? The option itself is created for that user at that point in time, depending on the journey of the user. Connecting back to what we do at GoFood, there have been we've been on personalizing user experience in terms of ordering food. Our search and recommendation algorithms are extremely personalized at this point in time. So are things on price, as well as even the delivery time is an area where it will get user centric. So personalization is a big theme that we are also driving across the organization. Yeah, so that's my take on what's going to evolve next and where we are at.
Hey, thanks, Mathangi. And
Okay, yeah.
please go.
No, sorry, I'm done, Manas.
Javed and Ishu, if you can also please chime in.
Yeah, thanks, Manas. Maybe I can start now. Hi, everyone. I'm Javed. I have about 17 years of experience being an analyst working with the data. In first 8 years of my career, I mostly worked with banking organizations, and another 8 years with eBay. And then for the last 1 year, I've been working with Uber. So I have my teams working mostly in the areas of fraud risk, payment, and compliance spread across Hyderabad and Bangalore Central. So I can share a couple of important aspects of using data analytics and AI uh, in the companies both matured and also in a startup setup. I think I would try to lean in the importance more towards the companies which are at the startup phase. So I think we talk and focus a lot about building like really sophisticated solutions, AI models, etc. But I have always been I would say more impacted and also more challenged by the fundamental parts of the data, which is basically the clean data. So they say the data is asset, but the reality is that asset is only clean data because there is nothing more problematic or deceptive than a data which you cannot rely on, right? So in my experience, I have seen for calculating similar metric, there are four tables exist in a company, and they all four might give four different values. So what do you rely on? So particularly relevant for startups, if you're starting their data infrastructure, it's super important to focus on this basic aspects that data should be completely reliable, and it should be really easy for the analyst to get the data and fast, right? Because latency is highly frustrating and it delays the overall process of the entire business processes. I think right now, a lot of companies are focusing a lot more on the data engineering part of it also, because they want to make sure that the data is streamlined, reliable, and easily accessible. Uh, in this forum, in this meeting itself, the other leaders have touched upon a lot of important applications of that data in marketing, security, etc. One of that point I want to touch upon is about providing a magical customer experience. And again, let's talk that in terms of a company which is probably small in a growth stage, and it cannot afford a lot of infrastructure in towards building a human-driven solutions. So let's take an example of Uber itself when it started about 10 years back, right? So consider an example where you're trying to book a ride and you got cancelled, but still the system charged you a cancellation fee of, let's say, 20 rupees. Now, what used to happen about 10, 15 years back is the user had to call the call center, probably wait 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then talk to a person. And the person would probably first get the details and then take a decision whether you get your money back or not. So Uber was one of the first companies which introduced app-based return of such kind of problems, right? So you just go to the app, go to the help section, just raise a request that, hey, my trip got cancelled and I was charged, please return my money, and the money comes back to the app immediately. So when I experienced this for the first time, it was a magical experience for me. It provided a delighted customer experience. It saved the cost of probably keeping hundreds or maybe thousands of customer service agents who are taking calls from customers. And it all was made possible because there was an AI system in the background which was checking whose mistake was it and who should get the money back. So, yeah, so the application in the area of customer experience and customer support is probably one of the important ones that should be focused at an early stage for a startup. So yeah, I think we can move next to the next speaker. So probably Ishu, you must start.
Hi everyone, this is Ishu. I have about 15 years of experience. Started my journey with Genpact, then Dell, then Fractal, and now with Swiggy for over 2 years. Um, Very interesting, right? Because I started with core business, then moved to consulting, and then to a startup. Also a bit of roller coaster because I had to unlearn every time I made a switch. So that was that was quite interesting that way because it brought different challenges and each one has to be dealt in a different way. Coming back to the topic which we are discussing today, in terms of the role of AI and analytics for hypergrowth and customer experience in startups, my fellow panel mates have probably spoken almost everything which I wanted to say. However, as they were talking, there were other themes emerging in my head. Number one is a lot of while we've spoken about customer experience in terms of it being delight, but also there are sometimes egregious customer experiences. How do we proactively either identify them or prevent them? And AI and analytics can play an extremely important role in that. A lot of times our business leaders are always um, looking for this insight in terms of what is anomalous. So today my in this hour at an hyperlocal hour level, let's say, my OPD is going down in a certain zone, area, geo hash, and what's going on, right? So how do we have a detection system which tells us that what is normal, what is not normal, specifically for metrics which touch the end consumer, right? And how do we make sure that the customer is least impacted? So these should be identified and can be identified at a very hyper local level, hyper local being sometimes a zone, customer, or an order. And uh, based on a full scale AI, let's say, logic, they can be proactively either prevented or compensated, and that would give absolve a company in this age of highly competitive scenario for growth and all of that, to have a good customer experience and we can retain customers. That is number one. Number two, I was also thinking that a lot of the startups are in the logistics space, if I can say that. There's a service which they provide. So the importance of geospatial analytics becomes very important. That the companies need to have a good infra layer. Um, they can optimize on costs. They can optimize on again in terms of their customer experience, either through SLAs or more accurate SLAs, etc. So even that would be very important. The other thing is, as Mathangi was talking about, hyper personalization, right? So um, sometimes we have the data available, but what about the instances where we don't have the data available? Then through a very pointed, let's say, design of experiments, or we can do a crowdsourcing of data and get actionable insight wherein a full scale answer to a customer problem can be developed. So some of the thoughts on how AI could be effective.
Fantastic. I must really say that anybody listening in and, having been online for the last 15 odd minutes, they do not need to undergo any kind of a certification in analytics to understand which are the areas where analytics AI can make a major impact. And, absolutely wonderful, spectrum of, areas and fundamentals that the panelists have talked about, from delightful and profitable customer experience to avoiding any kind of a bad customer experience. Fantastic point. Cybersecurity, Javed, absolutely beautiful point about data being clean. And Saurabh, you talked about how, especially in areas where the fundamental or the core product may not be as differentiable, can you use AI to create that differentiation very early on? So absolutely fantastic topics. Now, very quickly moving on to another interesting perspective around, should startups think about analytics or AI or the intelligence team to be a separate team or embedded within each functions? And sort of, you have made a interesting point earlier about how different teams can be thinking about analytics. So maybe if I can invite Mathangi to share some thoughts, and if Himanshu and Ishu can join in as well on, should it be an embedded team, should it be separate, what are the pros and cons, how does it function better?
Yeah, it's a very relevant question, Manas, and an important point that needs to be addressed if you want to take impact out of data science and AI, right? The organization structure plays an important role in this. I think there are three pillars that could make AI successful in any organization. One is data, another is the relevant problems that the data can solve, and third and the most important is org structure, right? And org structure, the climate, the right set of data-driven thinking that most of the folks in the organization have. Now, the next level of detail is with what kind of organization structure makes data science flourish better. I have had the opportunity to work across different organizations with different structures. Somewhere where it is broadly, I can classify this as two different types of structures. One is a central function in which data science and analytics is the central function, and you kind of engage with different departments on a project or an initiative basis, finish that, and or run certain initiatives parallelly and show the impact, or and move on to the next set of initiatives. This is one way of operating it. The second way of operating, like you talked about, is the embedded structure, in which your predefined, data scientist or data science team is allocated with a well-defined product or a platform team, and you work as a pod. You are able to make these iterations faster. You are able to learn faster, etc. I think initially, when a startup is kind of trying to start experimenting with data science, it's very difficult to move to the pod structure. You follow in a central function because you're also at this point in time exploring a lot of use cases. Is this the right use case for AI? Is this the right use case where you need to go for a algorithmic solution over a deterministic solution, so on and so forth? Would this solution scale and things like that? So a good amount of prototypes kind of work can happen in a central structure. with the proper data science leader facilitating the problem and algorithmic guidance, etc. And also working with the right stakeholders from the central structure. That's one. That's to start with. It's if anybody is starting from scratch, that's a good structure to start with. And then as your infrastructure evolves in terms of your machine learning models, deployment infrastructure, right? Infrastructure evolves, data evolves, understanding of how do you measure data science solutions, how do you set your experiments, what's your control group, and things like that evolves. And also when the organization overall starts thinking more data driven, is when we can think of a pod structure where some of these central folks can go into different pods, and start causing business impact there. The one disadvantage of pod structure is that without a proper governance, and the governance only coming from product engineering / business folks in the product, from that product or platform vertical, could impact the overall robustness of the algorithms itself. So hence, there has to be a good governance structure thought of. Maybe the central function still can provide the governance and guidelines and things like that, or and there can be certain cross-functional governance that can happen. So the pod could evolve over a time. As long as the pod has good governance, then the pod structure for a mature company could be a right solution. Where it totally fails, or where scenarios that I have seen where it's not working, is pods completely act independently without any with a lot of junior folks from data science and without a full set of guidance available in it. That's possibly not a great place to be. So that has been my observations. Yeah.
Fantastic points. We talk about how the central function can still continue to play a role in providing the governance structure and overall theme. Ishu, Himanshu, if you can chime in please as well.
Yeah, so let me start with this survey which is conducted by McKinsey, and they have actually asked this question to the CEO of more than CIO of more than 1,000 companies, and what they have found that only a small fraction of true analytics value usually get unlocked, and in some sector it is only 10% or maybe less, and there could be multiple reasons for that. And one reason that they have identified is because what Mathangi was also saying, right? Sometimes these analytics teams are working in silos, and there is a tendency, and I think many of you would agree with me, when you talk to the data scientists, they have this tendency to actually think about complex things. They want to learn data science, they want to do directly NLP without even knowing the concept of basic statistics. But business doesn't need that, right? Business want to solve a real problem. So ultimately, irrespective of whichever model you follow, whether it's a pod structure or something else, it is very, very important. And there should be a tight collaboration from day one between analytics team and the core business stakeholder. Because if you think from the business perspective also, ultimately it is going to be the core business owner responsibility. They have to manage the KPI of growth or like customer experience. It is not going to be an analytics team who is going to the end responsible. It is still going to empower them or support them. So it is very, very important for analytics team to actually work very, very closely with the stakeholder of core businesses from day one. And they can also provide some very good insights, right, which technical team may not be aware of, some very real insight, and they can actually be built into the system when these AI solutions are built. And where I feel that startups get this advantage, basically, if I talk about big companies, it is still very, very difficult to actually get embedded into the system because there are so many processes. The leadership is very complex. You need so many approvals, requirements, etc. But in a startup, I feel there is a lot of agility and they have lean leadership. So I think they can collaborate better. So I think if you ask me, it is super important for this AI analytics team to actually work in sync with this core businesses group, and that's where they get successful. Like all these company like Uber and Swiggy, I think these guys are one of those successful companies which were able to actually generate the true value from analytics. And I think, I'm sure these guys would share their opinion, but I'm sure that these guys would have done a lot of collaboration with business, and it is quite important.
Fantastic thought. Thanks. Issue, what would you lean on?
I would definitely lean on the data science and analytics teams at the center of the activity in a startup. I would suggest that it should start from what products to build, and not like once the product is ready, how do I analyze it? Because that then the bus has already sailed. You've already built a product. All of that engineering, infra, product, cost has been sunk in, right? So it has to start from the product roadmap itself in terms of the cost and benefit analysis of what products are good or not. And the cost and benefits could be in terms of what do you think you're building the product for, right? Even the same goes for, let's say, business strategies, because they could be data backed business strategies which can be owned up on the company's roadmap, or consumer research backwards, or whoever is the end consumer, as a matter of fact, right? So otherwise then they'll be based on gut feeling and intuition, which is not good in this age where the competition is so high, the cost of failure is so high, and we know the reach of social media these days, right? Anything wrong is goes viral, and there's Twitter and all of it, right? So the cost of all this is very high. However, what Mathangi was also touching upon is that do you have a central system where all the requests come in and what gets prioritized? Because sometimes they which is in high impact, who decides what to work on, etc. Or should they be embedded in the business so that the domain knowledge is high and they're not working in silos and working on something which is not so useful to the business, right? So I guess the pros and cons are always there. I have felt that when the data science analytics teams are embedded in the business, a lot of time they end up doing busy work, because it's always about, can we look at this, can we look at that, versus what's my long-term vision, and I want you to have a fully chalked out strategy or a hypothesis which I want to test. So that is something the leadership will have to own, whatever structure they follow, whether it is central or embedded in the business, that the teams are working on the high impact problems. Now, whether they are based on core ML algorithms, or whether they are based on deep analytical frameworks, or sometimes they are simple analysis, right? And that depends on what is the business need, right? Which I believe is what Himanshu was saying, that not everything needs a complex algorithm. So that is something which the leadership has to drive, in terms of how things should be done and what things should be done. But yes, it has to be the core. Otherwise, a lot of these decisions could be based on intuition and gut, which is probably not advisable in this age.
So again, I think very fantastic spectrum of thoughts around, how it could be a mix of a central data science team, some bit embedded, along with the business functions. Collaboration is definitely the key. And I think, you guys hit the nail on the head when you said that not everything needs to be complex. Sometimes simpler ways could also work. And I think equally important is to prioritize what you solve for. So on that note, when we are now thinking about, especially startups have to think around how to set it up and all. What are some of the big challenges, you guys think that these startups may face, and hence they should be better prepared for? So, Javed, any thoughts from you, and Saurabh and Ishu, if you can chime in as well, please.
Yeah, sure, Manas. So yeah, I have not had a chance to actually be in that environment, working for a startup and setting up things. But yeah, while starting some new teams in the basically in, let's say in eBay or in Uber, there are some challenges that are faced, and I can probably relate that a startup must be facing as well. Is that I think when a company is trying to start up and building their main key, the hero products, right? One of the biggest challenge which may come is the prioritization and alignment, because you have a limited bandwidth. You do not have a 500 members analytics team. You probably have 10, 15 or 20 members team, right? So where you want to prioritize and where you want to align your resources across all leadership is one of the key challenges that you start with. The other one is about talent, retaining talent. So when you have a team of let's say 20 members, you do not have a luxury of saying to a person that hey, you will work only on building a model versus you will only do a reporting or you will only do a deep dive analysis. You probably need a person who is ready to do all kind of work related to a data. It can start from pulling data to creating a reporting dashboarding or even building a model. In this situation, what happens if you have hired a person whose mindset is no, I just want to build model because I'm a data scientist, right? So retaining such kind of people in that atmosphere environment becomes difficult. That is another challenge. Moving fast versus waiting for data to provide you recommendation and speak. So analyzing data and providing recommendation, it takes substantial amount of time. In that startup environment, leaders want to move really fast and take decisions from their guts, right? So setting up that understanding and that culture in the company, that we have to have some recommendation which is data driven, and then you can combine that with gut, and then you move forward. So having some kind of clear understanding is super important. And then there is a budget constraint, right? So and then there are decisions about whether you want to hire your in-house analyst, or you want to probably employ a third-party analyst or contractors, so that you can use the specialization of another organization which is probably providing services to other companies as well. So these are some of the important decisions which should be considered at an early stage when you are trying to set up AI at a growing stage of an organization. And then there are some other points which probably Himanshu, Mathangi, they raised about you don't need a sword, right, where you can solve the problem with a needle. So it's like same. Then when people have a tendency that they want to solve a complex problem using a complex method, but that may not be required all the time. So people need to understand it that they have to move fast, and you don't have a time and luxury to solve a problem using a very sophisticated method. So it's okay to go by 80/20, maybe apply some rules now and build a model later when things develop and mature, when the product really gets successful and the scale is achieved. I think these are the challenges that leaders need to bake in during the planning session at the start when they try to set up their AI. So these are some point of view I have.
Very fantastic. Use a needle, not always a sword. Saurabh, what do you suggest?
Yeah, I think so. I totally agree with Javed. One of the biggest challenge one faces is prioritization. Okay, you have limited bandwidth and you have unlimited number of projects, and everyone's projects are the most important one. And this is something we have a quarterly planning and we have adopted OKRs. So last quarter, I remember the planning meeting which we had. 2 hours, all the business leaders were after my life, and we have got 70 projects to be done. And then the founder arrives and then he says, okay, these are 70 projects, but these are my 5 projects you need to work on. And when we allocated the resources, there were 3 resources left, and they say, okay, with the 3 resources, you work about the next 70 projects, whatever you want to do. So focusing on your North Star, which are the most important things for the company's growth, and creating the prioritization framework is a super critical thing. I think so. Compared to enterprise, there is a lot of discipline of planning and creating the method and then creating a lot of PowerPoints. So all those things I never, like, after 6-7 months here, I've not seen PowerPoints yet. So creating the business case for doing the project and telling the how and telling the story is something which does not happen. But it's like getting directly into action is a big thing. The So prioritization is number one, I would say. The second is knowledge management. Focus on knowledge management. And knowledge does not only mean so because there is a lot of attrition, people are moving in and around, systems are changing. When you are coding, there is no documentation of what logic you went about and what analysis you did, what is the outcome of it. So knowledge management is a big challenge I see, and appreciation for knowledge management, because that's the end thing which you do. You complete a project, you move to another one, and you move to another one. So documenting the results, documenting the table information and all is a big challenge, and it's a very long term, long shot. You don't know when the company from a startup becomes a unicorn and a decacorn over a split of a second. Okay, there is one round of funding which happens, or 2 rounds of funding which happen. It moves from Series A to B to C, and things change. And the reliability of analytics, when it from a POC and a jugaad, it becomes into the mainstream feature, you don't realize it. Okay, and how critical it becomes, then later on you realize that, okay, there are 5,000 orders which got impacted because of something somebody wrote 2 years ago. So to me, that scares me the most thing, like knowledge management and that aspect. The third is, I would say, appreciation for good data strategy. Okay, people have an AI or analytics strategy, and to something which Javed also talked about, having a good data strategy is very, very foundational. Okay, and it means that, okay, from where the data is coming, how the transformation is happening, and organizing your data well, because a good algorithm can bring a 10% lift in the outcome, but a good data strategy can make the data scientist even 5 times more efficient. So a focus on strong data strategy is quite undermined, and what I've seen is most of the data engineers who were good have become data scientists, and now there is a big space void in the data engineering. So now data engineers, average data engine, like good data scientists are trying to become data engineers. So definitely love for data is a key aspect, which I would say, and knowledge management, prioritization, and focus on data strategy are three things I would say startups should definitely focus on the core for long term.
Fantastic. Ishu, what do you suggest?
So I've been thinking again, when things come last to you, everything has been said, right? I just feel one thing is which is unique to startups is this: they have a big FOMO culture, because probably most of the leadership is young, uh, the other people are also young, the work. So the culture itself is FOMO. Everyone is in a hurry. They want to do too many things, and very fast. So and then what happens is that and then because they want to make data backed decisions as well, uh, there is never enough focus to do a thorough job, right? But they want to try out everything, like that one last step which is left is also needs to be discussed, debated, all of that, right? So I feel that it comes with two problems. One is that the company is forever in an analysis paralysis mode. Like the decisions, though we sometimes feel are fast, they are actually not very fast, because you keep on going back and forth. The other thing is it creates a lot of analytics overhead on the system, with all the bandwidth constraints like my fellow panel mates have identified, right? So there is always like 70 or 170 things to do. So the organizations have to focus on that. Sometimes 80-20 is good. um, what is what is a definition of done, right? When do you say that yes, this analysis is done, this model is done, or this experimentation is done, and we are good to go? Those decisions have to be taken. When do you say that yes, this much impact is done, right? I don't need to now analyze it further and get the last 10 paisa out of it, or 5 paisa out of it. These are some of the things which the organizations, specifically the startups, have to focus on, and they face these challenges on a continuous basis.
And
Very
Manas, if
true.
I just
Yes,
add
please.
one thing, if I
Yes,
just
Himanshu.
add one thing, so what I have also seen one thing, this is a question of build versus buy, right? Sometimes have this question that whether we should build this capability in-house or we should buy it. And the problem that I have seen, Manas, so if you buy this service from a vendor partner, what I have felt is sometimes the company doesn't make them integrated to their teams. They treat them as transactions, and that is not good. Even if you are taking help from vendor partners, it is very, very important to actually also align them into your team, show them the bigger picture, so that they do not see it as a transaction. Then they are also aligned to the bigger goal of your company and the journey you are in. So I think what I have seen, if you are actually looking for a vendor partner, if you are working with a vendor partner, it is very, very important to do not treat them as silos, do not treat them as transactions, but embed them into your in your core teams and align them with the core vision of, and that's how they will be able to help you much more than what they would be helping if you treat them as transactions.
No, very valid point. Absolutely, Manshu. I think, unless, all your entire partnership ecosystem, comprising your hardware, software, consulting, your own teams, I think come along. A very valid point raised by, suggestion made by Ishu there as well, that don't try to extract the last drop out of it and make it endless pursuit. I think you need to know when to move on to the next problem. Prioritizing is a big challenge, and something very, very foundational when both Javed and Saurabh talk about data strategy, knowledge management, because those are things that get often overlooked. People focus on creating something fantastic with AI, but if you don't even remember or document what you have built, 2 years down the line, somebody else would be in trouble. And God willing, if the company goes through a hyperscale mode, you do not want these very interesting knowledge nuggets that you captured early in your company's growth to be lost. I mean, the recording practically the company's intelligence history is very, very important. So, thanks a lot, everyone. I think brilliant points there. Now, if we have to also think around that, if these are some of the key challenges, but if somebody, let's say, I don't know whose mandate it should be. In fact, if the panelists can also, kind of comment on that, that if somebody's thinking around what are the 5 or 6 core components of setting up the analytics practice, what are some of the things that they need to, solve for? I'm not just talking challenges, but just the building components, right? What are some of those 4 or 5 things that somebody can think around, especially, I would say, early to starting growth stage kind of startups that would start, thinking around analytics in a big manner. So, Ishu, if you can, start the conversation on that, please.
Thanks, Manas. Yeah, so if we, as a starting point, I guess the number one thing is the infrastructure, right? So especially for startups, there will be real-time streams, there will be point-in-time streams, the data, there could be structured data being captured, unstructured data being captured, clickstream data. So all kinds of data is coming or can be potentially captured as startups scale. So it has to be very clear in the CTO's mind or whoever heads that organization is that how this data will be captured, what tools through which these data will be captured and refined, and how it will get stored and where it will get stored. So there needs to be an overall strategy around these things to, first of all, clean access, good analysis, keep your costs down, uh, to name a few, right? So there are many goals with the whole data, and of course the fact that most of the startups are driven by data backed strategies. So it becomes very important that we are not losing on information just because we didn't have a data strategy or an infra strategy in place. So that is number one. Number two, like I touched upon briefly, but we also need to keep our costs down. So these are young enterprises, and money at hand is not like a luxury. It's not like that. So what open sources can be used? What do you build in house? That also becomes extremely important. So where do you really invest, and where you're let's say, even if you're not 100% aligned, but you are like okay to use open source, etc., because it probably gives the similar kind of results. That optimization also has to happen in terms of strategy as well as action. And then um, I would say even in the talent phase, right? So all of this also needs that what kind of tech team you want to build, right? That's also part of this journey, because unless until you have the right tech team, you cannot get the right answers or the vision for the company right, because it will be difficult to have that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Mathangi, what has been your experience? What are some of the building blocks you would, recommend people to think around when they're planning their analytics or AI journey? What are some of the basic building blocks that they should definitely think about?
So, meaning components itself, Issue touched upon quite a bit of it. So, fundamentally, team is at the heart of it. And to understand what kind of team you need to build, you need to first start understanding what problems are there, right? So, the way to start about this is to come up with a roadmap, understand with different stakeholders and what are the key areas that you need to focus on. Is a company based on OKRs? If there are, in which case are we signing up for certain business impacts? And if so, what is the roadmap we are looking at? What are the short and long versions of these initiatives themselves? That will determine and help understand what kind of team to build, or whatever team is there to reprioritize and focus on some of these activities. So that's on the team. Then center of this, and a lot of times I think is ignored, is infrastructure, which is making sure when these models are ready, they do have the right platform to go live. And when I mean infrastructure, I mean data collection, model deployment, and most importantly, experimentation as well, right? Experimentation is not an afterthought. It has to be part and participle of what we are building. So the second big component would be making sure we have the right infrastructure in place. Even if not so, what is the short term and long term infrastructure on that? These, along with the problems that I said, would constitute the components of building a good AI or a data science team. In terms of strategy itself, that could change as the team matures, as the overall AI team matures. Initially it could start on being razor focused on certain key deliveries, maybe low hanging fruits or some critical deliveries. But over a period of time, the team should also start putting a thinking hat and think on what other data science capabilities you want to build. Do you want to invest in building a good vision system, or voice, or should the NLP pipeline should get improved, etc. And also, one of the often ignored things in AI strategy or building an AI team is metrics, right? The contribution of metrics from a data team is immense. A lot of times, we focus as much on accuracies and internally looking model metrics as compared to externally how business metrics is changed. Metrics and experiments are also fairly closely tied, and that kind of ironing that out and making that the central piece of execution will also form a major part of making an AI organization successful and very aligned to a business. And that would be my
Fantastic.
take on it, Manas.
Fantastic. And Saurabh, what has been your experience so far? What do you recommend to any startup listening?
So I kind of agree with Mathangi. Very fundamental thing on the KPIs and metrics is very important. And starting and the OKR framework really beautifully spans itself. So the KPI tree of the organization is an important thing. The challenge in analytics is people get lost into thousands of matrices, and they don't know which is an input and which is an output and which is the ultimate output. Definitely financial metrics of revenue and profitability. Profitability in startups I'll not mention much. Okay, so revenue is a big factor. But what are the key customer metrics which will lead to things? When we talk about customer experience, is it NPS or and there are new matrices which are coming every day. So having your key and simplified KPI tree is a very important thing, leading from the CEO till the department and till the ground. The other piece is when the whole question is around the strategy. Okay, and some startups can afford a strategy and a mature person, some cannot. So definitely having some mentors who can help define the AI strategy, especially with the domain and the function area expert, is a good part. Who can come in and go, or who can leverage the expertise is an important thing. I think so that is sometimes quite not much valued, but it has a great significance. And what I'm saying is mentorship is more different than, like, it's a strategic roadmap. 3AI and AI Curate and all companies definitely help in this thing, in putting the roadmap, and then doing a quarterly review if it's going in the right direction is a key thing. But working hand in hand with the tech team is the third part, which I would say is, as your technology platform gets built, building the right beacons to capture the information. Okay, and generally what happens is you miss it once the release goes, and then somebody says, okay, tell me what's happening with this release, or how's this feature doing, and then you realize that the Google tracking is not put in place, or some of the beacons are missing. So having a data capture first mindset is a important thing. So partnership with tech is an important thing as well. So yeah, like Ishu had the problem, everyone has taken all the answers first. So I kind of banged on smartly with what Mathangi said and Ishu said.
So let me open up a question to all the panelists in that case. So I just briefly touched upon it, and I saw one of the questions coming in as well, that whose mandate should analytics be? Should it be driven at the board level by the CEO, by the CIO? If it is a distributed function, then should each business owner, CXO, each CXO think about analytics? Who should drive the analytics strategy? And a related question therein that, how do you do some bit of a leadership coaching on making sure that every business leader in the company appreciates the role of analytics and it's not something that's seen as a push coming from one particular mandate. So, would love to hear from all the panelists on this. Javed, why don't you throw some thoughts on whose mandate could it ideally be, and how do you make sure that it has a broader support ecosystem from all the leaders?
Yeah, sure, Manas. It's actually a pretty complex and tricky question, to be honest. I don't think there is a very straightforward answer that I can provide that it should be a pretty prop driven versus it should be distributed across all levels. So it has to be, all I can say is it has to be pretty balanced, right? People need to have a tendency of objectivity and using data to make decisions. But at the same time, there should not be a mandate that, hey, you cannot make a decision unless data guides you to do that. Because it's not possible to get all the answers for questions from the data itself. A lot of time, data has its own limitation. It can only provide you a direction till certain point, and then the leader or the decision maker has to apply his own judgment and experience to finalize the decision, right? However, I think I feel that it should be more like a distributed approach rather than a top driven. Because if you make it like very, very top driven, and if the company sets a policy which is coming directly from CEO that hey, you cannot launch a product unless there is an experiment which shows a positive result, right? Then you may not be able to launch a lot of your products and you won't learn and you won't take a risk. That will create another culture of a very conservative policy in an organization. So I think people need to be mature, smart enough on how to use, and it should be spread across each, I would say, each functions leader, the product leaders, the analytics leaders, to basically take that decision and establish that balance.
Interesting, interesting. Himanshu, what has been your experience there? How have you done that or seen others doing it?
Yeah, I think innovation is a mindset, and analytics and AI is innovation. So unless the company doesn't believe into that mindset, it is going to be very difficult to drive something really big. So where I have seen, and as part of BCG, I got this opportunity to work with multiple clients and got to see that in some companies were really focused. And right now companies are getting this seat in the executive council. We have rules like CIO and CDO, CADO, right? So basically there has to be some thinking and that mindset from the top. If you will try to do it bottoms up, then maybe you can do something here and there, but in order to do something big, it would be slightly difficult, what I have seen in my career. So I think somebody in the executive council should understand the importance of innovation. They should have that mindset of innovation, because at the end of the day, AI is also a lot of experimental, right? It is not possible that on all the experiment you are going to get some ROI. It may or may not possible. So unless the top in the board, and for startups it's easy, right? Saurabh has this leverage to actually talk to the founder maybe on a daily basis. But if we talk about this big organization, it is not that easy, right? So if the CEO or CF and all these people, executive council, is not aligned to that mindset of innovation, it would become really difficult for analytics team to actually drive something really big. So I believe, in short, that there should be some mindset. It may be soft, there may not be hard mandates that you have to launch 3 product in this year, or you have to do this, but that mindset has to come from top down, from the executive council.
Fantastic, very interesting, combination of thoughts there. And Ishu, what's your take on that?
I think I'm more inclined towards what Himanshu has said. So I was, in fact, I feel that at least in the startup business, I feel whoever is slightly more in an attitude way, if I can say it, that anybody who wants to up their game and show higher business impact, and when I say impact, I mean monetary, or even customer experience is monetary, right? I mean it will translate to growth, etc. That person has to be invested in the data road, the AI and ML roadmap, or data roadmap for the company, is what I feel. And hence it has to be the top leadership. it has to be a way of life in that company. Now, that doesn't mean you cannot try and fail fast. So, in terms of in terms of the speed of execution, I think there is still room for doing small experiments and understanding how we are performing in a week, right? Because we also have scale. So the number of customers we have. We are able to reach that significant level in a short period of time. So it can happen, right? But it has to be a culture in the company. If it is always good to have and it is not needed, then its utility is also good to have. The kind of work which will happen is also good to have. If it is not central to your decision making, then even the stakes of an analyst is or a data science organization, if I may say so, is way much lower, right? Like कुछ भी होता रहे, आपने तो बस नंबर दे दिया, आप निकल आए, and that doesn't make sense because you're not driving anything, you're not accountable for anything. So I feel on both sides of the coin, the data science analytics team has to be accountable as well, because they should be actively participating in the conversations of generating impact and showing that, right? That has to come out. So yeah, unless that happens, and that has to happen from the top, right? So that's what I meant. In fact, just one example I will give of it is, let's say the core businesses, which is our large enterprises like Dell, HP, Pepsi, the usual traditional businesses which we have, right? Or we have the startups like Swiggy, Uber, etc. Still, the business is not analytics, right? So we are still an enabling function. We are still in support function. But I had the good fortune of working in Fractal, where analytics is the main business, right? So I'm in the business of making money through analytics. And that is very different. So, when your stakes are, the higher your stakes are, the difference is there in your response time, in your rigor, in your everything, right? So I always jokingly say that I sleep better in Swiggy. I work harder in Swiggy, but sleep better in Swiggy. I might have been working a little, work-wise, probably it was easier in Fractal, but I couldn't sleep when, it was numbers. That was, so yes.
Very, very interesting ending. A lot of people listening it would start thinking around where do they need to move if they need to happen at the end of the day. And Saurabh, what do you think around it?
So what I would say is, I've hardly seen a CIO function being in startups, okay, because the company is into technology is the business, okay. They start with technology.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's hardly any CIO, CTO role, and I had like a few friends who have CIOs, and I used to joke that CIO means career is over. Okay, so I hope no offense to anyone, but it has changed into Chief Innovation Officer. But today also innovation is a factor of every. It's part of the role for everyone. Now, see, analytics is a way of measurement of your success. Okay, whether it is a company success or a project success or a micro success. Today, if I take a banner live onto my website and it is saying Diwali sale and it has a diya versus a Fuljadi, which is a better representation, I can know in a minute, in a day, with the CTR changing from 1.5% to 1.6%. So everything is minutely measurable. The challenge so analytics has to be in the DNA, and I feel that DNA culture is there in startups, whereas you have to create a business case and a cultural transformation in big enterprises, which all the consulting companies thrive off. So it's already there in the DNA, so you don't need to worry about it. You have to worry about the projects, which the number of requests which comes in with a lot of context. Everyone will come with the context that if I don't do this analytics, something will fail. Okay, and I'm getting calls also that I've rejected 2 projects today, saying that okay, this will result into some loss or something. But you have to take those tough calls every day. That where do you focus your energy, and how do you do deep versus quick and dirty, and then say okay, this is an Excel-based analysis. Take your data and just figure out and do something to fix it. So the good part about see, at the end, your growth is the function of the contributions you make. I would say your growth is a function of your learnings, and learnings is a function of your experience, and your experience is a function of the projects you work on. And the pace at which projects work on in startups is very high. Okay, so in 6 months, if in a enterprise you might work on 2 or 3 projects, you might have worked on in 8 projects in that 6 months. So your learning and growth will happen quite fast. And you cannot learn swimming by reading a book on swimming and then thinking about how to swim. You have to jump in the water, and the bigger water you dive in, the more better swimmer you will become. So I would say startups are a great place to learn very, very fast. It's a pitch for all who are listening. So I would say startups and consulting companies are a great place because you see a variety of use cases. And initially we also talked about that should analytics be part of a department versus central. See, analyst thrives on working on interesting problems. Okay. And if you are associated only to one function of a company, then you are limited problem sets. Every company will go with a, like if you're part of a logistics team, they will do a big project on logistics, and then they will be a maintenance phase, and then you will get bored. The next thing you will be there on, you will be on LinkedIn and Naukri.com. So you have to give new challenges to people every time, and that's where working on different problem statements is a key thing. And wherever there are a lot of problem statements to work on, people will be highly engaged and learning. So I strongly believe, analytics is one place where you have to learn HR, logistics, finance, marketing, all subjects. So it's a fun place. And I was talking to Samir over a coffee, and he mentioned that tomorrow's CEOs and founders will be coming out from people from analytics background. So definitely learn a lot from 3AI, and you will. There's a huge to experience.
Fantastic, absolutely, and very good prediction, Samir. We'll look forward to having many more people coming out from your kind of platform and our kind of platform. And Matangi, your closing remarks on that particular topic about where should the mandate lie, who should be responsible for it, how do you make it broad based? What are some of the good practices you would love to share?
Sure. I think to exactly answer the mandate question, sponsorship is important. It has to have a CXO sponsorship or a founder who believes in data-driven decisions. Otherwise, it's very difficult to get it bottom up. But having said that, a lot of startups do come with some of these mandates inbuilt because they are native digital and so on and so forth. So CXO sponsorship is fairly important. But beyond that, that's alone not going to make things work. In terms of who's going to coach the leaders in business on their importance of analytics, etc., at some level business impact should speak for themselves, right? There can be an initial mandate, but if the value is not created, there is obviously a doubt, and different priorities take over. So the value needs to speak for itself, and that's what is continuing to keep the mandate on if every business is very market focused. So the initial mandate though can come from some of the CXOs or founders, and or even the board at some point. To keep things going and make it meaningful, the business impact should focus on that, and that's where some of the senior data science leaders in organizations play a role, or CDO plays the role in certain places, where you are constantly talking about the impact that is created, and hence the next level the org can move based on analytics and data science. So the constant thrust, it's a blend between the business impact and how well it gets communicated by the data science leaders or CDOs, back to people who are taking it in the business. So that's possibly how I would think about the mandate, and yeah, that's my remark as well.
Fantastic, fantastic. Probably time for one last question, I would say, and many interesting questions, coming across. And, one of the questions that have been asked is that, you have the open source world from a tech point of view having taken over the closed loop ecosystem when it comes to analytics. How does a startup think around blending their product tech with the analytics tech? What are some ways of thinking around what should be your tech strategy when it comes to either the data platforms for analytics or the core analytical languages to code in or deployment part of it, what could be the right way or a few ways in which you can think around that? So Javed, you definitely have seen very large ecosystems built on that. So any thoughts that you would have around uh, either about specific technologies or how to think about the right kind of a tech strategy? You touched upon data strategy. Now kindly share your thoughts on the data strategy, the tech strategy as well, please.
So yeah, I don't have too much expertise on the tech side, I would say, Manas. So, and I'm also not very clear on the question. If you can elaborate maybe once more,
Sure.
I can try to share my thoughts.
Sure. So my question, Javed, is that what kind of how do you think around what kind of tech tools? Whether do you rely more on closed loop system? Do you rely more on open source systems? Do you go on cloud? Do you use package tools? How should a startup think around
Yeah,
as
so
they progress in the journey?
yeah, I think cloud is definitely increasing its coverage of those everywhere. Earlier, we used to work on thick client based tools. Now everything is almost on cloud and it's shareable easily. You don't lose information. There are various advantages. Uh, Big companies which have already developed a lot, like Uber, they use a lot of their in-house technologies and tools. So, for example, Uber has its own machine learning platform. So you don't have to write codes to build a model in Jupyter Notebooks, right? They have developed their in-house platform where a person, and it's really configurable. So you can select, okay, which algorithm you want to apply, what are the different variants you want to keep, and so many other parameters. And you can just specify that. Like the analyst needs to focus mainly on the feature development part and on the logical aspects of building an AI solution. Everything else in the platform has already been built by the platform team in the company itself. And I've seen like many big organizations moving in that direction. So there is a huge investment on the platform side where the AI related platform, like they are trying to minimize the efforts which is used in writing and debugging the codes and basically the syntactical part of the entire exercise. So the analyst job should be focused mainly on, okay, what is the core problem? How do I solve it logically? What are the right variables and features I can select? And then these platforms and tools are so sophisticated that they take those parameters and provide the results. So it's really hard for me to say like whether it's a company which is just starting up can start with these kind of things or not. I'm also not aware if there are third-party solutions which exist which provide this easy to use platform. Uh, but yeah, maybe Mathangi, if probably you have more knowledge in this area and you can share some more thoughts around this point.
Sure, Javed. Like, Manas, you started the question with open source or not. So I don't know if the debate is still there on open source or not. Most of the technologies are open source. Of course, governance and things like that become key, and they need to proper data encryption and things are important. But I don't think the world is yet there for a closed loop system. So things have to become open source, and that's the choice of technology where it is getting used, or at least as of now, a lot of adoption on open source thing. Architects also play a key role as they design some of these technologies to support future data science solutions. Most of the cases, unless otherwise, the company has a backbone of data science and AI. Analytics solutions or data science solutions start coming, in phase one or phase two of the product itself, right? And hence, architects need to provision for some of these as these are principal architects in the company. They need to a little bit think about when the data science solutions start playing their part, how would the product work and how would the API calls, etc., reside, and so on and so forth. In terms of model deployments itself, like Javed said, there are already existing tools, and that's an upcoming area, the ML ops, ML engineering area. So there are products out there which kind of makes deployment fairly data scientist friendly. I wouldn't say what we have today, will make a data scientist take their hands off and really focus on math or business problems or data or algorithmic solutions, right? They still need to do a lot of ML ops kind of thing, copy pasting files from one place to another, making sure the packages are same between your dev environment and your production, etc. So there are tools there, and I think that will be that's where it is going directionally. It's certainly better from at least 3 years back, where deployment was. 3 years back, the general debate was whether you code these solutions from scratch in another language like Java or something, or kind of build models in those languages itself. But now things are changing quite a bit, that you do build a model in one of the environments and plug and play. Take Amazon SageMaker or MLflow, things like that. You could with lesser effort go live with some of these models. Investment in real-time stores is also key. For example, and that's where a lot of real-time models get blocked, and hence there is a tendency to go for a lot of batch models, etc. But for real-time models to be the state of the art and to be the first solution to go, investment in good real-time stores, good compute power on these real-time stores also become an important thing.
Fantastic thought. Fantastic thought. So, really, I'll field one last question to each of you, and literally, a quick 30-second kind of an answer from each of you. We have heard a lot of do's today. Right way of picking the technology, right way of thinking about the team, the right way of thinking about the mandate, the right way of thinking about your analytics strategy to be driven by business, or in certain cases, business driven by the analytics strategy. Let's flip the story a little, and couple of don'ts. For couple of things to avoid, couple of pitfalls, couple of distractions to avoid. And Ishu, why don't you share some thoughts, and would request each panelist to share quick thoughts on that.
Manas, I'm not clear about the question. Sorry, I just missed that part.
I'm so sorry. I'm just saying that are there certain things that should be avoided? When thinking about analytics. For example, people did share perspectives about that. You don't go to the final insight extraction. Are there certain other things? A couple of things that you would suggest people avoid. Startups, fundamentally startups, I would say.
I think that was my main point. That don't go into the analysis paralysis mode. Learn to identify the top priorities of the company and then work towards them. Have analytics as a must-have function in the company and not good to have. A lot of times they end up doing busy work, some insight which is good to have, some prediction which is again good to have, but it may not be touching your most important customers, etc. Right? So all of this probably is super critical when it comes to startups, and they should optimize this. I would say the real estate they have, or the asset they have in the data science organization, and use it to their advantage.
Fantastic. So avoid just being busy, be more productive. Fantastic thoughts. Mathangi, what do you think?
Problems first, data next, impacts first, right? And everything else can wait. This will get you a seat on the table of core decision making and driving OKRs and the next level of org strategy. So the reason for existence is delivering impacts, and any data science team needs to keep that in mind.
Fantastic. So focus on the reason for existence. Himanshu, what do you suggest?
Yeah, I think learn to say no. As Saurabh said, that there could be many use cases, because every business function would want to use analytics, whether they know the impact or not. So I think learn to say no. And I have seen that there is a feasibility metrics that typically help there. That you build this 2x2, where on the x-axis you have effort required, on the y-axis you have the impact, and then you try to identify those use cases which are really impactful and require less effort. And once you show that confidence that after spending less effort and we have this real impact, then I think people would have more believe in you, and as a startup you will get more funding, because at the end of the day, whatever we say, as some of the fellow panelists already mentioned, that we also need funding, right? And analytics is expensive, so ultimately impact has to speak for itself. I think Mathangi has already said that. So I think do not pick something which require a lot of effort but impact is not clear. I think start with the low hanging fruit, low effort, more impact, and I think it will give you a lot of leverage to and funding to experiment and thrive.
Fantastic. So good suggestions there. And Javed, any closing remark from you, and then Saurabh, of course.
Yeah, sure, Manas. I think first is a very unanimous opinion that impact is primary. In my experience, probably more than half of the effort which analysts put that goes just behind informing people and it does not result in any actions. That's like a very bad situations to be at, right? Like all the execs and VPs, they have a lot of curiosity and questions. So the analytics leader need to be strong enough to basically call out all these useless questions which do not have probability of resulting in actions. So that is a, I think, probably phase way across all analytics leaders. The other one is, I think, equally important as a conflict of interest. So my advice to every organization would be do not have your analytics team reporting to the someone who's taking the decision. If a product manager is launching a product, the analyst cannot report into him, right? You have to be a very separate, fearless entity who can say no, the result is not good and we don't want to launch it. And that's true for any business unit, not just product. It can be true for a marketing launch, it can be true for a new BD, for anything. So analytics is a source of truth and it should not be suppressed by any desire to show a positive result.
Fantastic thought. So separate the church from the state. Do not mix them. Fantastic thought, Javed. And Saurabh, your closing remark on that. And go ahead, please.
So yeah, again, I had the problem which Ishu had. Everyone has completed all the points. I have left with something. Okay. So one of the things which I feel is, the pace at which analytics happens at startups is very high, and we hardly get time to think. Okay, by the time you do it, you have two more projects. But communicating the results and impact and the narrative is a very important thing. Okay. And especially when you are going very counterintuitive. Okay, so communicating analytics in the business language and making sure people appreciate the value of it, the onus results on us only. A lot of times we just create an analysis, send over an email, and the context is lost. So definitely set up that 10 minutes time, 5 minutes time, talk about it, discuss it, and you will know. A lot of times misinterpretation on analytics also happens because the business context is something, the data is not captured properly, and you kind of make some weird result out of it. So having a conversation is important. Don't communicate analytics only by email or WhatsApp. Definitely have discussions, conversations, and go and validate the business process and the data captured as well. So that the conversation is a key thing, which I see a lot of times we do that mistake. We kind of jump over the analysis. Oh, we have found something, and then we realize, okay, in version 3.2, the release, the analytics piece, got dropped out. So, so it can happen. So what I'm saying is, have conversations and debate and doubt the data that it might be wrong before you make a bigger conclusion.
Interesting note to end an analytics debate on sort of doubt the data. Doubt, but I, point very well taken from all the panelists. And what an interesting last 1.5 hours it has been. Folks are starting with what are some of the key functions, some of the key impact areas from creating customer delight to avoiding any kind of a customer disaster. Talking about infrastructure, talking about the mandate, who should be driving it, how you should be thinking around a centralized analytics function, hub and spoke model, collaborative ecosystem, and ending on a whole lot of things that startups and leaders can avoid. So I really thank all the panelists for sharing their thoughts so freely. I am very hopeful that all the startups and younger folks listening in would carry more than a few things back home, much more than probably they would learn in a 3-month or any other kind of an MBA program on analytics. So 3AI, thanks a lot for organizing this absolutely fantastic roundtable discussion, and thanks to all my fellow panelists, and thanks to all the people who are participating there.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Thanks, Manas.
Thank you, Manas and Samir, for having us for the conversation. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.